Imagine carrying the weight of an entire stadium on your shoulders every Sunday. 80,000 people screaming your name, millions more watching at home, jerseys with your number flying off the shelves. Now imagine carrying something else entirely. A father in prison, a brother killed by a drunk driver, children you fathered across state lines that you barely knew, and a son, a 2-year-old boy whose body you had to identify in a South Dakota morgue, 4 days before you ran for 182 yards. This is not the Adrian Peterson story they show you in the highlight reels. This is the one they never tell. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you will never see the number 28 the same way again. Before we go into the darkness, let's establish what the world saw. Adrian Lewis Peterson, born March 21, 1985, Palestine, Texas. By the time he retired, the numbers were almost incomprehensible. 14,820 rushing yards, second most in NFL history at his peak. 7 Pro Bowl selections, the 2012 NFL MVP. A man who in one season came within 8 yards of breaking the all-time single-season rushing record set by Eric Dickerson in 1984. 8 yards. His teammates called him all day, as in he could go all day, as in he never stopped. NFL coaches who faced him in game film sessions have said things like, "We knew where he was going, we knew the play, and we still couldn't stop him." At his peak, Adrian Peterson was not just great, he was something that made football look like it wasn't designed for everyone else. And yet, the man behind that number 28 jersey had been running long before he ever set foot on an NFL field. He had been running from things most of us will never have to face. And to understand that, we have to go back, all the way back, to Palestine, Texas. Palestine, Texas, population around 18,000 people. Anderson County, deep East Texas, where the pine trees grow thick and the summers feel like they might never end. It's not a wealthy town. It never was. It's the kind of place where people work hard and expect little, where Friday night football is the closest thing to religion, and where a kid with exceptional talent is both celebrated and burdened by the weight of everyone's hopes. Adrian Peterson was born into that world. His mother, Bonita Brown, worked hard to hold the household together. Quiet strength, the kind of woman who gets up before the sun and doesn't stop until well after it sets. His father, Nelson Peterson, was something else entirely. Nelson Peterson was by many accounts an extraordinary athlete in his own right, a former basketball player at Iowa State, a man who understood sports at a level that most fathers never could. He coached Adrian. He pushed Adrian. He was the kind of father who saw the gift inside his son and refused to let it go to waste. But Nelson Peterson was also a man with a secret life of his own, a life that would eventually pull him away from Adrian at the exact moment Adrian needed him most. But before all of that, before the prisons and the grief, there was just a boy in Palestine, Texas, a boy who could run. A boy who ran everywhere, to school, from school, through the neighborhood, across the fields, not because anyone told him to, but because running was the one thing that felt completely, entirely his. When you grow up in a world where so much feels uncertain, where the ground beneath your feet never quite feels solid, you find the thing that makes you feel powerful. For Adrian Peterson, that thing was speed. And nothing in Palestine, Texas, or anywhere else could touch him when he ran. Nelson Peterson, Adrian's father, was charismatic, driven, the kind of man who lit up a room. He was also, for a significant portion of Adrian's childhood, in federal prison. Nelson Peterson was convicted of money laundering related to drug activity. He served time when Adrian was still forming the most foundational memories of his life, still in that critical window where a boy looks up and decides what a man is supposed to be. And the man he was supposed to model himself after was gone. Adrian has spoken about this in interviews, carefully, deliberately, the way people speak about wounds they've learned to manage but never fully close. He has said that his father being in prison was something he didn't fully process as a child, that you adapt, you normalize the abnormal, you tell yourself a story about it that makes it survivable, and you run. There's something that child psychologists have studied for decades, the way children of incarcerated parents carry a specific kind of grief. Not the grief of death, which has a name and a ceremony, but a living grief. A father who exists but is unreachable, a phone call through glass, a visit that ends. Adrian Peterson carried that grief through every youth league game, through every high school touchdown, through every sprint across those Texas fields. He carried it quietly, because in the world he grew up in, you carried things quietly. You didn't put your pain on display. You ran through it, always forward, never stopping, because stopping meant feeling it. If the father's absence was the wound that never fully healed, what happened next was the scar that never faded. Adrian Peterson had a brother, Brian Peterson, not his full biological brother. Brian was the son of his father from another relationship. But Adrian loved him the way brothers love each other, completely and without qualification. Brian was 9 years old. Adrian was 7. On a day that started like any other day in Palestine, Texas, Brian was struck and killed by a drunk driver. He was riding his bicycle. He was 9 years old. Adrian Peterson has said in interviews that he remembers the moment he found out. He has said that it was the kind of thing that changes something in you permanently. That before that day, the world felt like one thing, and after that day, it felt like another. He was 7 years old. 7 years old, absorbing the reality that someone you love can be here in the morning and gone by afternoon. Gone because of someone else's recklessness. Gone without warning. Gone without goodbye. There is a theory in trauma research that says the body keeps score. That grief we don't process fully doesn't disappear. It relocates into the muscles, into the patterns of behavior, into the way we relate to people and loss and permanence. Adrian Peterson's body kept score. It kept score on every field he ever played on. Some say his ferocity as a runner, that refusal to go down, that rage against being stopped, was never just athletic. It was something older, something 7 years old, something that lost a brother on an ordinary Tuesday and never fully came back from it. But here's the thing about Adrian Peterson. He did not break. He bent. Repeatedly, severely, but he did not break. And when he stepped onto a football field, everything that had tried to break him became fuel. At Palestine High School, he was not just good, he was generational. The kind of talent that makes opposing coaches call their defensive coordinator before the game and say, "Just don't embarrass us." College recruiters came from everywhere. He chose the University of Oklahoma. And in Norman, Oklahoma, Adrian Peterson became something the college football world had never quite seen before. As a freshman, as a true freshman, barely 18 years old, he rushed for 1,925 yards. He finished second in the Heisman Trophy voting. Second! As a freshman. The college football world simply did not have language for what they were watching. Then in his sophomore year, a knee injury. Torn ligaments, the kind of injury that ends careers or fundamentally changes players. Adrian Peterson came back and ran for over 1,400 yards the following season. In 2007, the Minnesota Vikings selected him 7th overall in the NFL draft, and almost immediately it was clear that the NFL was simply not ready. In his rookie season, he ran for 1,341 yards and set an NFL single-game rushing record, 296 yards against the San Diego Chargers. 296 yards in one game. He was 22 years old. Then, in 2011, another devastating knee injury. ACL and MCL tears, the kind of injury that takes most players 12 to 18 months to recover from fully. Adrian Peterson returned in 9 months. And in the 2012 season, he rushed for 2,097 yards, won the NFL MVP, came within 8 yards of the all-time record. He came back from a torn ACL and nearly broke a record that had stood for 28 years. The commentators called it miraculous. But it wasn't a miracle. It was a man who had been overcoming impossible things since he was 7 years old. The football field was just the place where the whole world got to see it. And now we turn to the part of Adrian Peterson's story that the highlight reels skip entirely. At the height of his fame during those MVP seasons, during those record-chasing years, Adrian Peterson had fathered children with multiple women across multiple states. The exact number has been reported differently by different sources over the years. What is documented is this. There were children Adrian had limited or no contact with. There were mothers navigating parenthood largely alone. There were child support disputes and legal filings. The public, when it found out, was divided. Some condemned him immediately. Others pointed out that this is far from uncommon in professional sports, where young men with extraordinary talent are handed extraordinary money and extraordinary access, often long before they have the emotional maturity to handle any of it. Neither reaction fully captures what was actually happening. Because to understand Adrian Peterson and his relationships, you have to go back to Palestine, Texas. You have to understand a boy who grew up watching the most important man in his life come and go. A father who was physically present sometimes, then absent, then present again. Psychologists who study intergenerational trauma have a term for what often happens to children of inconsistent fathers. They struggle in adulthood to model consistent presence themselves. Not because they don't love, but because they were never shown what sustained, day-to-day fatherhood looks like. Adrian Peterson was an exceptional football player. He was a man still learning at 25, 26, 27 years old how to be present in ways that no one had ever taught him. That is not an excuse. There were children who deserved more. There were women who deserved more. But it is a context, and context, when we're trying to truly understand a human being rather than simply judge one, context matters. Adrian Peterson grew up watching a man he loved be physically absent and emotionally complicated. And then, without anyone sitting him down and showing him a different way, he became famous. The money came, the access came, the adulation came. The emotional education never did. And then came the moment that shattered everything. In 2013, Adrian Peterson learned that he had a 2-year-old son. Not a son he had been raising, not a son he knew well. A son he had only recently discovered existed, the product of a brief relationship, a child being raised in Sioux Falls, South Dakota by his mother. Adrian Peterson had begun taking steps to be involved in this child's life. He had spoken about wanting to connect, wanting to be present. He never got the chance. On October 11, 2013, Adrian Peterson's 2-year-old son was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. He had been beaten. The man responsible was Joseph Robert Patterson, the boyfriend of the child's mother. Patterson was later convicted of aggravated assault and aggravated battery of an infant. The child's name was not publicly confirmed by Adrian Peterson. 2 days after being hospitalized, the boy died. He was 2 years old. Adrian Peterson flew to South Dakota. He identified his son's body. He held what was left of a life he had just begun to know existed. He had to stand in a room, a cold, clinical room, and look at his child, a child he would never hear laugh, never hear speak, never watch take a first step or catch a football or fall asleep in the backseat of a car. And there are no words for that. There is no framework. There is no playbook. There is just a man and a grief so enormous it has no shape. Adrian Peterson has said very little about this publicly. The few times he has spoken about it, his voice changes in a way that makes clear this is not something that has ever left him. It never will. Some losses don't heal. They just become part of the architecture of who you are. 4 days later, 4 days after identifying his son's body in a South Dakota morgue, Adrian Peterson suited up for the Minnesota Vikings. He ran for 182 yards. The stadium cheered. The commentators marveled. The stat line read like any other Sunday. But Adrian Peterson was not on that field because he didn't feel. He was on that field because he felt everything, and football was the only container big enough to hold it. After the game, he sat in front of reporters. He spoke about his son. His voice was steady in the way that voices are steady when a person has made a decision before they walk into that room to hold themselves together for just a few more minutes. He said that playing was something his son would have wanted. Maybe that was true. Maybe it was the story he needed to tell himself to get through the game. Maybe, for a man who has processed every hard thing in his life through motion, through speed, through the physical act of refusing to be stopped, standing still in that grief was simply not something he knew how to do. We don't have to agree with it, but we can understand it. A man raised on running ran, and 182 yards later, he sat in his car in the parking garage, and he cried. In 2014, less than a year after burying his son, Adrian Peterson faced another public reckoning. He was indicted by a Texas grand jury on charges of reckless or negligent injury to a child. The details, which Peterson did not deny, involved him disciplining his 4-year-old son with a wooden switch in the manner he said that he had been disciplined as a child growing up in Palestine, Texas. The images of the child's injuries circulated online. The reaction was immediate and severe. The Vikings deactivated him. Sponsors suspended relationships. The NFL placed him on the exempt list, meaning he was paid but barred from all team activities. Adrian Peterson maintained that he never intended to harm his child, that this was how discipline was practiced in the community he grew up in, that he had not understood the line he had crossed. He eventually pleaded non-contest to misdemeanor reckless assault. He was sentenced to 80 hours of community service and a fine. Here is where this story demands the most from us as viewers, because what Adrian Peterson did caused real harm to a child. Full stop. And also, Adrian Peterson learned parenting from a world that normalized physical punishment. From a world where men who were hurting passed that hurt forward in the only language they had been given. His father was in prison, his brother was killed, his son was murdered. He was never taught gentleness. That is not a defense. It is a cycle, one that stretches back generations in communities that have survived extraordinary hardship through hardness. The real question, is not simply whether Adrian Peterson was wrong. He was. The question is, who taught him that this was love, and who taught them? So what do we do with Adrian Peterson? He is not a hero without complication. He is not a villain without context. He is a man formed by forces that were set in motion long before he was born, by poverty, by a father's absence, by violence and grief arriving before he had the language to process them. He is also a man who made choices, real choices, that caused real harm to people who deserved better. Both of those things are true. This is what makes human beings so difficult, so genuinely, profoundly difficult. They are rarely one thing. Adrian Peterson is the little boy in Palestine running because stillness meant pain. He is the 7-year-old who lost a brother on an ordinary Tuesday. He is the young man who grew up without a blueprint for fatherhood because the blueprint was taken from him. He is also a man who fathered children he wasn't present for. He is a father who stood over his son's body in a South Dakota morgue. He is a man who disciplined his child the way pain had disciplined him. And he is a man who got back up every single time. Not because he was unbreakable, but because he didn't know how to stay down. And maybe, just maybe, that's the most human thing about him. Not the 14,000 yards, not the MVP, not the record chasing, the getting back up. Every time. From everything. Adrian Peterson is still alive, still figuring out, as we all are, how to be a person worth being. He has spoken in recent years about his faith, about his relationship with his surviving children, about the work of becoming a more present father than the one he had. That work is quiet. It doesn't make headlines. It doesn't get highlight reels. But it may be the most important thing he has ever done. We watch athletes and we see the physical, the speed, the power, the record books. We rarely ask, what did it cost them to be that? We rarely ask, what are they carrying? We rarely ask, who was this person before we needed them to be great? Adrian Peterson was a boy from Palestine, Texas, who lost too much too young and ran toward the only thing that made the world feel controllable. He is more than the number 28. He is more than the yards, and he is more than his worst moments. So are we. If this story made you see Adrian Peterson or any person you thought you fully understood a little differently tonight, then it did exactly what it was supposed to. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs it, and we'll see you in the next story, because there are always more stories. Stories that the highlight reels never tell.